Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting our students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm the founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and many other places around the world. And if this content is for you, then please go ahead and subscribe to our email list for free at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Brit with us today. But Brit, before we start, we would need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, always.
Let's do this because Brit Morenus, it has a goal to make learning fun. And when she isn't supporting Microsoft Contact Centers with Gamified Learning, she can be found homeschooling her daughter and volunteering with local youth. And she truly feels gamification can be a successful approach for all ages, for everyday life tasks, work tasks, education tasks, or even your routine tasks. And she has served Microsoft for almost 10 years. She is currently the lead of a self-formed Gamification Advisory Board and running gamification efforts for Microsoft Store and Microsoft Advertising Contact Center employees. She has more than 5 years experience using gamification for the continuous on-the-job training. And during that time, she has produced award-winning game-based learning experiences and obtained several certifications, including, but not limited to, for sure, the Sententia Master Craftsman Certification title, as well as Microlearning and Gamification certifications from Centrical. And she is currently working on a book called An Organizational Guide for Gamified Learning with her partner in game, Karl Kapp, who is also a past guest of the podcast. So fantastic things going on. Britt, are we missing anything from your intro that you want to make sure we catch?
No, but that explains why I am so exhausted. Thank you for reminding me of all of those.
Well, I can tell you because now I can say it publicly because I already mentioned it in a past episode and I've sent it on my email list and I've said it on LinkedIn as well. I am actually taking a break, at least 1 year break from my day job and dedicating myself full-time to Professor Game and associated activities. So all the teaching that I do is going to take a lot more of my efforts. The workshops that I organize on gamification, when I travel around to conferences and all of that, when I do consulting with gamification, and everything else in between is going to be taking all of my time. Because of course, now that I have a little one, you need to make sure that there is time for her, because before my sleeping time was already limited. I couldn't limit it too much further with a little one. So I needed to make sure we had time for that and all of the fantastic things that have been building up. So I can feel you there.
No, that's incredible. And it's good to actually take that time to focus on your passion projects as well. And of course, raising your little one, you're getting into my favorite time. You're close to 6 months now, right? You're about 4 months?
Yep. She just made 4 months.
I love it. I love that phase when they start sitting up and eating and their personality starts forming. So yeah, you're in for the road now. They're going to start crawling, walking, saying no, all the fun.
Yeah. Very soon I'll have to change everything around our home.
Yes.
So she doesn't get electrocuted or anything worse.
Yeah, and I see you like hiding in a closet at the wee hours doing Professor Game when you can get a free moment of silence. But it's going to be totally worth it for sure.
No, actually, I did some like in anticipation, and at the time I was kind of hesitant, and I said like, this is too much of an effort. But we soundproofed, again, not studio quality really or something, but we soundproofed with the room where I'm at right now, which is our studio. Now I shared with my wife. We both work from here. And it's whilst it's not perfect, she could probably be screaming in the next room, right? And we would, maybe I would hear it, but the recording wouldn't, and you definitely wouldn't as well. So, I have a little bit of fail-safe on that one, but everything related to my video games and board games is on a library that is right next to the floor. So that's going to have to change, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. It's well worth it though.
Absolutely, for sure. So Britt, we always want to know, because it is not too common to have somebody who is working in a huge tech or non-tech company that is actually doing gamification, that has a person who is really dedicated to doing gamification to whatever capacity, right? So We are especially curious today to know, what does your day look like, or days look like? What does it feel to be Brit Morenus and do gamification at Microsoft? And all the other things, of course, that you do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, during the work week, I mean, this week I'm struggling to wake up, right? Daylight savings hit like like a storm. But once I get going, it's quite funny. So Microsoft Store as well as Microsoft advertising teams, both of which I support, are global teams. So there's many a days where I actually am working before the kid's even awake. So before mom duty picks up, get a couple calls in, a few emails, kind of settle my day. And then I do take our child, we do homeschool her, but she has a like hybrid program that she goes to. So there's kind of a different program each day, which she gets to live just this awesome life. But I'll go and I'll take her and drop her off. And then I come back and it's plug away. I would say meetings are pretty much like 75% of my day, Monday through Thursday. And then my entire team has now implemented what we call Focus Fridays. So we try not to have any meetings and just bust out all of the action items on Friday there where we're focusing. But just like the mornings, there's a lot of time where I flex in the afternoons once the child is back home. And then I get back online after her bedtime so that I'm there for the start of Asia's day and so forth. So it's all over the place, kind of like you mentioned before dropping out of the full-time world. But yeah, so the meetings are going to be with stakeholders. It's finding out where the problems are, figuring out how training might be able to help. And I try to meet them where they already are. So the meetings that they have scheduled, maybe with our contact centers, maybe with each other, maybe with our product builders that are like at a different part of the company, right? Because it is a pretty big company. So I'll join meetings that are already out there as much as I can without having to, schedule just with one person here and there, and try to listen in so I can like proactively find those opportunities for training and that kind of thing. And then the 25% of my day, Monday through Thursday, when I'm not in calls, I'm creating content, which probably seems crazy. But as you mentioned earlier, I'm 5 years in now to running gamification for Microsoft Store. I'm a year in to running for the advertising team. So I do say I could do gamification in my sleep, and I actually probably could. So creating the content doesn't take as much time for me anymore, although we continue to try to diversify our styles. So of course, that does take a little bit more time as you massage a different idea or try something new. But yeah, lots of meetings, lots of ideas, and then lots of content time.
A lot of time, a lot of things going on. It sounds absolutely exciting and amazing for sure. And Brit, being in the corporate world, I've been there in big corporate as well, not big tech, but big corporate. I know that there's many NDAs and many things you can and can't say. So whatever direction you want to take, and as specific as you can, but not more than you can for sure. Can you let us know of a time where you were trying to use gamification and things actually did not go your way? So something that you might call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. We want to be there with you. We want to listen to that story and take out some lessons for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be honest, there can be a lot of failures when you're trying to go down the route of like incorporating game mechanics into your training. There's just a lot of components to it, right? But one thing that stands out for me is just, shaping your decision to create the training for the learner and instead of yourself. Actually, Rob, if you'll do something for me, this is something I do typically when I am in person showing my camera, but even though people can't see us, we'll be a little vulnerable here. If you take your pointer finger, draw a capital L on your forehead, and you have to do it because we're not watching. So don't cheat us. And then I'll ask you, did you draw the L so that you could read it, or did you draw it so that if I were sitting across from you, I would have been able to read it?
To be completely transparent and honest, I am not entirely sure.
Okay.
If I told you I did this or that, I would not be completely honest. I'm not entirely sure.
So
I think I was trying to make it so others read it, but I have no idea what came out.
We need to get you a mirror in your studio. So the reason that I do this is because one of the first problems that I saw is that I was creating content that I wanted to take, that I wanted to complete. But the problem is I was not the intended audience. I already knew the material and I didn't need to learn it. I wasn't going to perform the job at the end of the training experience. And so what we tell people in these conference experiences is if you drew it for yourself to read, you probably don't realize you subconsciously are also worried about your own motivations, your own learning styles, et cetera, et cetera. And to really step into the shoes of your learner and figure out what's going to motivate them. And so with that in mind, I kind of had to level set and fix my training. And one of the reasons was, for instance, I told you I'm a global team. So the Asia teams that I worked with, they were not motivated by competition. Matter of fact, giving them a leaderboard where they were competing with their colleagues was a demotivation for them. So we quickly turned it off and made it like a personal leaderboard. And then they were fine. They were absolutely fine seeing week over week how they had done for their operational metrics in their own scale, right? But not being compared to someone else. Whereas like a USA culture, even an EMEA culture, they were very much so like, yeah, let's go, competition, love it, love it. But the Asian culture was not. So it's one of those moments where you really have to step back and say, okay, what is actually going to motivate my learner and work for them, and realize that they are the ones that truly have to take that training at the end of the day and have impact from it.
It is super, super important to keep that in mind, engagers. I can't say it enough. As you know, part of what we do when we're discussing in our workshops and the stuff, to make sure that other people as well are able to do gamification, at least according to what we do, to our experience, one of the steps, which is, at least for me, it is crucial, is understanding who you are designing it for.
Yes.
And definitely 99.9999999% of the times, it is not for you. You are not designing for your own self. You're designing for somebody else who is different from you. So keep it in mind.
Yeah. And I will say, anyone listening that's like, well, how do I do it? For one, just kind of survey them and getting to know. But another really cool thing is letting them help you make the training. That's one way we overcame it, is by giving them a chance to be part of that training creation and picking which game elements we were going to use, and then getting that light bulb moment of like, oh, they don't even like the one that I thought was super cool, and going with an element that they actually did prefer. So definitely get them involved if you're listening and wondering.
And that is co-creation. That is absolutely fantastic. And one thing that I do love, I had to be completely honest, I haven't used co-creation as much. I've found it a little bit hard to get, and again, it's usually not an internal audience that I'm working with, it's a client. I found it a little bit harder to get them to be willing to sort of put their own efforts into doing this. It's always, I kind of get it, but it's also like, yeah, but you'll get something better if you do that. I'm paying you to do this, right? So it's not like I'm trying to get away from being me, the one who does it. I just want to make it better and make sure that, you also get some skills out of it and so on. But, not everybody is open to that. But if you're managed, or if you have some good persuasion skills as well, especially if it's an internal audience that you're designing for, I definitely encourage at least giving it a shot, right? To get people to be involved, because the benefits are, uncountable, I would say.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. They really are. They're unmeasurable, honestly. It leads into just the things that we struggle with as well, but it's unmeasurable, the amount of benefits that you can have from gamification. And sometimes it even makes it a little hard to prove the gamification or even the training is working because of how many things it might impact and influence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Brit, let's turn this around entirely and actually go for a story where things did go well. One of those moments, maybe a proud moment, however you want to go for it, however you want to mention it, because we want to be there again with you. See, perhaps instead of some learnings, we want to see here some of the success factors, perhaps. I don't know. Take us on that tour, because we want to be there with you and we want to take those lessons away.
Yeah. So what I can say is we obviously had training, 6 years ago before we started 5 years ago with gamified training. But the reason that we decided to pick it up is we weren't consistently hitting our operational metrics, something like customer satisfaction to be specific. And so they're kind of like, okay, it's like you could train someone and then it would get better for a bit of time, but because you weren't again training them, it would obviously start to slip, to feed off. I don't even know how to put it into the right words, but you would see the metrics start to slip down again, and they wanted the consistency, right? So we came in, we started this gamified program mainly because gamification can be very engaging. It's motivating, yes, but it can be engaging. It brings you back. You want to do more. You want to do better. You want all the rewards that are kind of tied within that game system. So that really helped us engage our learners in making them kind of want to do better on their own as well. They obviously have commissions and things that are tied to their operational metrics, so that's also a good improvement, but they can't get that if they're not consistently keeping their metrics where they are. So anyway, keeping the consistent metrics was our problem. And it did take a little while, but we eventually got to the point where our metrics were finally consistent. And I think we all breathed a breath of fresh air. And we've been there now for 2 years. And the examples I have is things like COVID or even just new product launches or inventory shortages. In the years prior to meeting our metrics, it would have caused these massive drops, right? Like nothing consistent. It would have just been this deep dive in a metric where you then have to really pull back up and go make sure you can address those customers again and figure out what happened. But after we saw the gamification implemented in that continuous on-the-job training, which is what we use in our gamified learning tool, we saw that in those hard times, it didn't dip like that. It actually stayed really close to metric, as if they were able to hold on even in those ambiguous times, which was really, really cool.
Huh.
Yeah, I can say too that from our learners, because of course we asked, they told us that they had started to actually trust the game, which just warmed my heart and it gets me out of bed when I'm struggling in the morning. But they knew that they could trust that the game was going to have the priority content, right? So like when you're overwhelmed, I think we've all been there at a job, you're overwhelmed with like what might actually be the important thing to do or to know. They said that they trusted the game would have content related to the priorities, and that helped them figure out what was most important. And then it also built their confidence because they're constantly practicing like customer conversations inside of our game tool, right? And so that was building their confidence up to then pick up the phone or answer the chat with a customer and feel like, okay, I've got this. So very, very cool to finally be at this stage.
And I'm sure that got you as well a lot more. And that's a very neat thing of doing gamification and doing it, as I was saying, for a large company where you can do and do and do. And there's always going to be more to do for sure, because you can have that consistency. And once you start gaining the trust, it's not like the trust of a client in which, you kind of do it and maybe you can continue with that client, but that doesn't take up sort of all of your time usually. You don't want it to. This commercial strategy says you shouldn't have just one huge client and, the client falls through, you're out of business, right? So that's kind of something you don't want to do. But if you are working internally for this, gaining that trust, right, makes such a huge difference, right?
Yes.
Because once you have it, and people are trusting what you're doing, it's easier to do the next thing. And then the next thing gets easier once again, because you again achieved your objectives and so on and so forth. So I'm sure it was a very, very exciting time. I'm actually excited for you, Brit.
I am as well, for sure, to be here now. Now, it came from a lot of different game-based solutions, though, I will tell you that.
I'm sure. So, Brit, you're writing a book, right? You've mentioned all the time that you've been working on these things. Do you have, or what is actually, more than do you have, what is your structure? What is your process? How do you approach a project when you want to use gamification, especially this specialization that you have on learning, which is definitely one of our main and central core topics here at Professor Game?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we come at it so many different directions, and thankfully it is working. They have to bear with me because of my own game passion here. I mean, I hit them with gamification, with game-based learning, also with the gamified LMS. I mean, it just comes from all angles, but they accept me, which is great. And I'll also explain a little bit more. So when I was talking about the content, and you just said it yourself, like letting things work for you so that there's a lot of work at the beginning, but eventually there's not as much more work to do, right? We are so very lucky at Microsoft to be able to use a platform called Centrical. And if you haven't looked into it, it's Centrical. Centrical is basically an LMS, but it's a gamified LMS. So what we actually do is you pick a narrative, you have a customized avatar that you are playing with, you're able to give and receive kudos, you earn badges, you can share best practices or like give hints and helpful tips and things to your peers. You can also opt in or out of the leaderboard depending on what you want to do, and just so many more game elements, all within the tool itself, which then allows me to set all of that up and strategically release them, not all at one time, right? But then eventually I'm just focused on creating content. And within the tool, there's also like simulations, quizzes, puzzles, fun content, mini games. Like there's all different kinds of various content that you can create inside of that tool as well. And you can also add in like SCORM files and things like that. So again, because the game elements just kind of run on their own, I'm able to focus less on them. You still need to like monitor them, but you focus less on them and then be able to create content. So to your point, yeah, it takes a lot of that. I don't want to call it a burden, and I almost said that, but it takes a lot of that structure off of my plate. But that's just one part. So that is my continuous on the job, like, 70% of what I do. And then we also have an actual LMS for our new hires. So we use SuccessFactors, which a lot of you have probably heard of. And that would be creating those SCORM files and throwing it in. And again, that's new hire content. So like brand new to the job, you have 3 weeks, you're in that tool. We actually this past 2 years or so have gone through and recreated all of that content because I was the one that was like, it needs to be microlearning. Like these long modules have got to go. The thing of the past. So we went in and turned them all to microlearning in a high flex modality where we were able to have some that were in person, because some of our call centers have returned to in person, and then some that were online versions where it needs. There are some cultures that are still having to stay at home a little bit, depending on COVID numbers and things like that. So we have that high flex modality going. And then the best part, Rob, is I went behind every single one of them and I made a gamified assessment. So they see it when they are in new hire and they complete the gamified assessment, just that one, phase of new hire. But then inside of my gamified learning tool, my Centrical tool, they'll see it again when their learning product knowledge KPI drops below a certain point. It becomes their practice so that they are able to get back up to the product knowledge point where we think they're best able to serve our customers. So those are really cool game assessments. It's a card game and it reads you a customer scenario. So you go through basically all the answers a customer would tell one of our agents when they were on that customer service call. And then the agent gets to decide which product they would suggest that customer purchase, based on solving the customer's needs. So it allows them to practice and, Surface, Xbox, Windows, Office, all the things, right? Which is really cool. And then inside of that assessment, there's like trophies to earn per all the levels for the different products and coins that you're collecting. There's helpful hints that pop up. And of course, there's bonus cards too, where we talk about market comparison. So I don't know, Rob, if they want to know what compares to, a device that might have a picture of a fruit on it, they can do a little bit of that practice to see what product we have that might compare with it. So it's just fun. It's fun. So we have, game-based learning, gamification, a whole gamified LMS, and they all work together just to make sure, again, that there's good training being delivered from the first point, but then that continuous learning on the job so we can stay up to speed with our knowledge.
That sounds absolutely amazing. It seems like you almost have it all figured out.
I like to think so, but then something will come up and we'll make something else to
as it should. Amazing. So thank you for that process and for all those tips that you gave right there.
Yeah. It's definitely fun. I say the more the merrier. Some people will tell me not to to slow down, but it works. And again, I'll reiterate, this is like years of stuff, right? Compiled in. So obviously no one would start with all of these projects at once.
Amazing.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification.
So Brit, what would you say with your experience and all the things that you've done? And again, I'm referencing the book many times because we are very keen and curious to see when it does come out. We want to have more of all that knowledge that you and Karl have been working on. But would you say that there is some form of, I don't know, I want to call it a best practice, one of those things that makes your projects at least a little bit better?
Yeah, actually the entire point behind the book is the management of a game-based learning or gamified learning program. And I have to say, this is probably not the answer you're expecting, Rob. I'm not going to tell you like you must have an Easter egg. But what you need is a program manager, or at least a group of someones who are managing that gamified learning program. I mean, it is crazy. We've talked a little bit about today, but it's crazy the amount of things you can do with gamification, and someone's got to be there to take charge and manage it. You need predictability. Your learners need to know that things are coming. Like I talked about, them trusting the content was going to show priorities. They need that accountability with their content. But you also need someone to research the learners, right? And understand their motivations and pick the game elements you're going to use. You need someone analyzing your content. What in the world is the point of delivering content if you don't even know if it worked and drew impact? So someone's got to do like a training measurement plan and figure out maybe how you're going to edit and when you're going to re-release it again and things like that, and how to spice up the experience, months down the road if it is no longer engaging or motivating, or, you have a wave of new hires or whatever it might be. So yeah, definitely, I think, and it's in the book, but the number one key is that program manager, or at least the people that are dedicated a certain amount of time to that gamified learning program.
Amazing. And it's definitely one of the things that I like a lot about that answer is that it is entirely new for us. I don't think anybody had mentioned something like that before. So thank you for that recommendation, Brit. And Brit, keeping up with recommendations, I'm sure you have many people in mind. You've met many people at conferences, and if you're writing a book, it's the typical thing that at least you've read a bunch of books before that.
Yes.
So is there somebody that comes to your mind when I say, who would be a future guest that you would like to listen to on Professor Game, answering the same questions that you have?
Oh, Rob, you're going to get me in trouble. We know so many of the same people. You already talked to Karl. You could have him again. I would say that Centrical does have an amazing gamification platform. So if you haven't spoken with them, that would be a cool guest to have, just to dive into why they gamified their platform in the first place. It used to be called Game Effective, which I loved, and they've changed it. So I won't tell you why, because it would be great to have them explain about putting the employee at the center of the experience, which, spoiler alert, it's where the title comes from. But I will say too, if I need one person, I would recommend my friend Corey Horde, who has a Lego Serious Play certification. And he is now training in that methodology. And there's something about it that has intrigued me. We're a big Lego family, but as soon as you hear his perspective and just the methodology's perspective, it gives you such a cool spin. And I cannot wait to go to a conference now and lead from that standpoint of like getting your hands dirty so you're a little bit more vulnerable to talk. And by dirty, of course, I mean building Lego so that you forget what you're doing, forget what you're saying, and are a little bit more vulnerable. So really cool concept there.
Absolutely. In fact, I got last year my own certification, and I've been enjoying every single time I've had the chance of using it for my workshops.
I figured.
As you can imagine, I have a bias to using it on gamification, but I'm also looking forward to using it on things that don't necessarily have to do with gamification. Of course, that's going to be harder to find, to come by for me.
Yeah, I saw your podcast, the latest one, announcing that you were going to do Professor Game full-time, and I saw the picture, and I was like, I bet Rob has his Legos.
Yeah. In fact, I if you haven't heard it, and if you're curious about Lego Serious Play, I have the founder of Lego Serious Play, one of the two, Robert Rasmussen, who was the one who gave me the certification.
Nice.
There's two, but he's the one who's kept, they sort of split up. They were both employees of Lego. Robert, I would argue, has the biggest certification area, and they've sort of made a 2.0 of the original LSP, and it's absolutely amazing. And the perspective, like even if you've heard of it and you've done it, you go with all these thoughts in your mind, and then you get out and it's like, oh, there's so much more.
Yes, absolutely. There really is so much more. And then, like you just mentioned, there's more you can do with it too. It doesn't have to be a training experience, it applies. It might even work to get, your teenagers or something talking to you. So it's definitely worth.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me, and I've mentioned this before, and of course, Robert, he is the one who taught me this whole concept, is that it's all about, and you mentioned that you spend a lot of time in meetings, right?
Yeah.
The typical meeting has one or let's say 20% of the members of the meeting taking up at least 80% of the talking time. At least, right? Sometimes it's even worse, and they take even 100%. And there's other people who are more shy, or, whose voice is not as high, or their position in the company is not relatively so high. So you kind of, don't get their ideas, which is essentially a huge loss, right?
Yes.
The more brains that are giving ideas, the more variety and diversity you can get, the more perspectives you get. And of course, you get to better conclusions. Again, 99% of the times. There are times when you don't need to have any democracy or any of these things. You just need to go for the executive decision. But when you have a meeting, the meeting is essentially to make decisions and to share things and to have other people's opinions. And he says that the intention and actually the results that you get from a LEGO Series Play is that you get the meeting to be 100-100. So 100% of the people are talking 100% of the time. How does that work? Well, through LEGO Series Play, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And to actually get things done as well, not just to talk about them, but to get started on the actions. That's what I try to do, at least with meetings.
And then there's a perspective. I've also heard about this. I knew a facilitator before going to take that myself. One of the things that she shared with me was, it is true that all of that is true, but it can be a little bit frustrating if, you don't have the actual support from the organization to implement the changes and the ideas that you get from the workshops, right? So you need to have that real backing from the company of, we're going to work on this. This is work. There's a lot of effort. This is not a leisure activity where, people have fun together and that's it. This is actually hard work. This is hard fun.
Yes.
So if you don't have that commitment beforehand, it can sort of spin around, and all the fun that you had and all the good ideas that you had is going to turn into angry employees because they're going to say, look, I really poured my soul in here, and now you're telling me none of this is getting done. Right. So there's, it's not the dark side of the methodology. It's the dark side of making sure that you get the right people on board. And this is probably a bit more commercial or I don't know, business related rather than methodology related. But I think it is important in any case.
It is. We actually did an escape room one time, and it was the same thing. You spend the hour, right, trying to get out, and it was a virtual escape room because we're a global team. But the coolest part, Rob, was that at the end, they had one person come into each little group, and you were racing the other groups to see who got back to the main room first. But they had someone from their company in each of the groups. And that person actually took time to say, this person is a team leader. These people work good together for these reasons. I saw these skills come out of this group. So we actually had like a team exercise from this fun hour that we spent, trying to work together and get out of this virtual escape room. So to your point, yes, the actual reward of having done the hard work and then there being a benefit to having do it. It's really cool.
Absolutely. And it is, I would say, absolutely crucial. So Brit, let's keep up with recommendations. We've talked about the book. Definitely once it's there, it's going to be that book that we have right next to yours. But what book would you recommend the engagers? And of course, let us know why.
Oh, good question. Good question. So you know what? I could have recommended this person for your podcast as well. So maybe this is a double whammy, but a friend of mine, his name is Scott Provence. He was at Google for quite some time, and now he's running his own consultant business, but he has written a book called Fail to Learn. And it's actually like a manifesto for training gamification, but he really dives into how you're going to learn from your failures more than you will your successes and allow you to create just stronger and more impactful training because you make a few mistakes there along the way. So totally a good work. Again, Fail to Learn.
Sounds like an amazing recommendation, and hopefully he can also be a potential guest in the future. We'll look into that. And now that you've mentioned, other people's work, sort of other people we want on the podcast, other people's books, your book, of course, once it does come live, what would you say is your superpower, that thing that you do at least better than most other people?
Hopefully this has come over, but I'm extremely passionate. And I think the passion for games in general kind of leads my creativity. I always have humor incorporated in my training. And it's just not going to be a dull experience. It's always going to be a lot of fun. So I always say the fact that I want my own learning experiences to be fun means that I'm going to create fun learning. Well, I hope they're fun. Good feedback, but I'm going to strive to create fun learning experiences. So for me, it's that passion that's really driving it. And, I didn't create it, right? I was just born with it. I don't know why, but I love some game strategy. So it carries.
There you go. Very important superpower to have, especially in this world, because, even though gamification is being more and more embraced by many people, companies, and leaders, there is definitely a lot of people who are not embracing it. So you need to, lead with that passion for sure to be able to convince those people to be convinced, let's call them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I always, for anyone listening that might have dealt with one of those said people Rob mentions, I always just lead with the fact that at the end of the day, you want a strategic thinker as an employee. And that's exactly what game strategy can bring to your employees. So it totally works. It totally works. Tell those, naysayers to sit down and be quiet because game strategy is the way to go for sure.
Definitely. And we get to a difficult question finally, right? Because all the ones have been kind of a breeze, right? Because they're interesting and so on. But this one's going to be difficult for you, right? We want to know, what would you say, Brit, is your favorite game?
You know what? This is hard because I feel like an obligation to say something like Minecraft. For anyone listening, I actually do have friends on that team. I will give them a quick shout out and say I do love, as a homeschool parent, I love that Minecraft does have educational experiences for the kiddos. And if you're listening and you have kids, it's free. So totally check out Minecraft Education. But I am actually a hands-on gamer. I like some board games. I like card games. So my daughter is 7, almost 8. We are big into like Candyland and Guess Who. And then because we are homeschoolers, you can only imagine, I'm like already laughing at myself, but we gamify everything in her curriculum. And you might think I'm crazy or that I'm lying, but I promise I'm not. She also has ADHD. So the focus of a worksheet is just overwhelming for her. And if you were to give her a worksheet of like 100 math problems, she will cry, potentially, just not want to do it. It looks so overwhelming for her brain. But yet, if I put the math problems on Post-it notes and hide them around the house and give her another deck of Post-it notes that have the answers, she will run around and in like less than 10 minutes be done with all the same problems. So we are constantly gaming things, but I do like to get my hands dirty. So I'm definitely the kind of board game, card game, in-person thing.
So you've been dodging the question, Brit. I caught you on this one. What is that favorite game? Let's go for it. Give us one. I don't know if it's Minecraft, but you kind of said yes, but kind of other things as well.
Right now I will say that it's Guess Who, and it might be a crazy one, but I love playing with her and hearing the creative ways that she's looking at everybody. And Guess Who has a pet version now, for the record. But you can like look at the cats and dogs and that kind of stuff. And then what we actually did is I went on Etsy and I bought a PDF where you could customize it. So we actually put like the grandparents and the aunts and uncles and her cousins and things like that as the little Guess Who people. And we now play our family. Call them out. So it's really cool.
Sounds like a lot of fun for sure, Brit. And Brit, we're running out of time, but of course, before we go on to our next thing, we want to know if you have any final words, anything else you have left unsaid to this point. Now is the time to say it. Where can we find out more about you, about the work that you are doing, before we say it's game over?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, honestly, LinkedIn is going to be your best connection. You can find me on there. It's always Brit with 1 T. And then my last name is Morenus, which is Morenus, Morenus. But my overall advice is just please don't give up. It takes so much more work to add in the game elements and assess the motivations and things like that. But you will have a better impact from your training if you do gamified learning. So please don't give up. Keep going. Sure. Create those strategic thinkers and impromptu decision makers and just have better employees from it. Don't give up. Make learning fun.
Let's do this. Let's go. And Brit, thank you very much for participating on the podcast, for investing this time in the engagers. I know you did have, as in any corporate, when you're going to talk about the work that you do outside of the company, you had to go through several hoops to be able to be here. So I thank you for that as well. However, Brit, engagers, as you know, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Engagers, it is fantastic to have you around, and thank you for listening to this Professor Game podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like our very own Brit, please go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list, which is, as I've always mentioned, absolutely for free. And that way we'll be in contact. You'll be the first to know of anything that we're doing that might be related to you. And before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, Please remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app, also for free subscriber follow depending on what the app says. And then, of course, listen to the next episode of the Professor Game Podcast. See you there!